This is Conspirinormal, where the nexus of conspiracy theory and the paranormal meet. And now, we join the show already in progress with your hosts, Adam and Serfiel.
Okay, well guys, welcome back to Conspirinormal. I'm here, it's Adam and this guy. We have on the line a guest here that I've found out about from being on the Nashville Podcasters group, and that is also lives here in Nashville. Her name is Naomi Van Winkle, and she has a book out and a podcast called Cult in Connecticut. And we're going to be talking about her life and her experiences in the King's Chapel Church. I believe that's right, Naomi?
Yes.
Okay. Now, a lot of people don't know about this group. I had definitely never heard of it until I listened to your podcast. And just basically, I had seen you talk about it on the National Podcasters group. I said that, like, I'd like to have you on to talk about it, and well, you're here. So
Here I am.
What?
We made it happen.
So let's start with this. I think this will be a good way to start. What made you want to start this project, this podcast that you're calling Cult in Connecticut? What made you want to do this?
When did I start to basically want to do the project, have the inspiration or whatever to do it?
Yeah.
So I kind of talk about that in my book. I have this little short, it's very short. Don't expect it to be long. It's very short. It's my first book. So it's like, I just wanted to get something done and get started on writing. And so I did this little short memoir about my childhood in this cult, and it's called The Cult in My Living Room, inside the King's Chapel. My childhood inside the King's Chapel. So I talk a little bit about why I basically decided to do this. But it really was coming from wanting more healing from the trauma that took place. I look like I'm thriving in society. I have a business. I'm married with kids, and but there are things throughout the day that trigger me. There are thoughts, negative thoughts, negative feelings that I'm really trying to work through, and I'm really trying to heal from. And a part of that is diving in and finding out, why am I feeling this way? Why am I having these thoughts, And a lot of it has turned out to be things that were stemmed from this group and the things that the people believed in this group. And I grew up in it, and I was born into it. And I just am learning how to deprogram myself. So the project for me has been a part of this healing process.
So it's been therapeutic to just kind of go through it.
It's been very therapeutic. That's what it's all about for me. But it has turned also into this thing where I'm able to shine a light on this place that nobody knows about yet. And it's this small little cult that it was this independent thing that no one knows about yet. And it's so different from anything else I've ever, of course, if you learn about a bunch of different cults, they all have these similar things, which I think is so fascinating. Like the charismatic leaders and, the manipulation and control, and the brainwashing and stuff. But this one is different to me. They labeled themselves as a Christian church, but it was a little more extreme than a Christian church. There were things about it that it's kind of like a Christian church, but it's also kind of a cult too. So, it's very interesting. very fascinating. So I worked on the project for me as like a healing thing and the book. It also has turned into this, informative thing where we're able to shine this light on this group. And I feel that it's an important topic that, in humanity, that this is happening, that there's this manipulation and control and stuff going on in these groups, in this group setting, and not even in a group setting,
Can you talk a little bit about how you structured the podcast, like what, how you've put it together, what you're kind of, with doing this podcast as not necessarily like an interview format like ours, or you really just what you're doing is collecting these people's firsthand testimonials. Can you talk a little bit about that, why you decided to kind of structure it that way?
Yeah. So basically I didn't know how it was going to look and how it was going to work out. And I really didn't know if it was going to be just me working on this project, and I didn't know if I would have any contributors or anybody to interview. But there were these people that were prior members that stepped out and told me that they wanted to support me through my healing journey. They wanted to support me in this and stand with me. And they were brave enough and courageous enough to share their story. And it was very difficult, I'm sure, on everybody. It was definitely very difficult for me, because we were taught to never say anything negative about the church or the group or the people in it, or, that is a major sin. Like, God hates you if you do that. So, I was definitely, had a lot of fear with doing the project. But I'm so glad I did it. But I've had a lot of support. These contributors who ended up saying that they would be a part of it, I ended up just doing random recordings with them and just wanted to find out, really honestly, out of sheer curiosity, what is their story? Because my mind has always played games with me, like, was this real? Did this really happen? Was it really as bad as I remember, or as my nightmares say that it was?
Sure.
And I've held that inside. I haven't really talked about it with a lot of people. Not a lot of people know that I was in a cult, or know my childhood story, or know about my family and where I came from and stuff. I kind of have kept that hidden and on a lockdown, which I talk about in my book. But basically, after I did these recordings with these contributors, it just started magically flowing and coming together. I cannot even tell you really how, but it just started falling into place. It really, really did. Each person corroborated each other's stories, but none of them talked about it, what they were going to say. Like, no one had, not that I know of, no one had contact with each other. This was over a span of many months.
Yes,
and
all their stories were I've listened to the whole thing, and all their stories are very, very similar to the
it's
to the
insane
other.
to me.
They have very similar experiences.
Yeah. It was so validating for me to hear person after person after person describe the things that I thought maybe I could remember, but I didn't know 100%. One of the things that I deal with is my mind has blocked out some, whole years of my life. So, it's done that to protect me. But it was so validating because I've had nightmares about so many different things. And then I wake up and I'm like, I must be insane. Like, it must not be real. It must not be true. But then, listening to those interviews, and I know that there's so many more details and topics that I was not able to, cover, but because I just have these specific stories to work with, there are more details, there are more topics that I wasn't able to cover, but it was enough to really help me get to my next place, to where I could really start seeing like light through the trees again, and start really validating myself, validating my memories, and hey, it was all real, it was all true,
Were these people?
It was awesome.
Were these people that you had kept up with over the years, or Had you sent out an email to them, or how were you able to track them down?
I think I pretty much like sent them a Facebook message like, hey, I haven't talked to you in forever and I'm doing this, and will you be a part of it? And I reached out to a lot of people. Like, I had a whole scroll list, like Santa's scroll list of people that I could remember. And I asked them all, and those were the people that responded and said yes. There were a lot of people that were supportive, but they're just either not, were not either ready or were not interested or willing or whatever to tell their story and share. But for me, I felt like at the time the truth would set me free. And I was kind of on to everybody, like, the truth will set you free and we must do this. But now I kind of look back and I kind of have compassion on people that weren't able to share because, you know, it was an extremely difficult and painful and scary thing to do. So it's not that, you know, I don't have judgment for anybody that wasn't a part of it, but I really am thankful for the people that were willing to be a part of it. And it just turned out so beautiful. It turned out, I'm so proud of it. It's like a work of art to me. And it's just something that it's like, you know, if you do believe in God or the divine or whatever, it just really did fall, or just magic. It just fell into place just so perfectly because each part, you know, the whole thing builds, and then the whole thing, you know, each person shares more details and then more details and, you know, different topic that's important. It just all fell together and it came out so good.
Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel comfortable talking about kind of like the origins of the church?
Yeah, and just the basic structure.
Yeah. So,
like where it starts, who starts it.
This is like super hard for me to talk about. And also, I was born into it and I grew up in it. So I am like this second generation person. There's a whole crew of second generation kids.
That were born and grew up in this church.
Yes. And we all, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I want to say, I can probably say it would be accurate that a lot of us, if not all of us, if not most of us, have had a lot of severe struggles, you know, with trauma and all different kinds of things, pain and all different kinds of battles or whatever you want to call it. The aftermath, the psychological aftermath of this place. But basically, so I am not familiar. That was one of my questions when I was going into working on this project is, how did this thing happen? You know, where did it get started? How did it happen? So there are a few episodes that touch on it. Seth talks about it and Jane talks about it, about they were there when it kind of got started and became more and more and more intense. And they kind of describe in their episodes how it gets more intense as it goes along. But I guess it got started. So I guess my answer to that question is the Seth episode and the Jane episode would definitely help explain it.
Okay.
But basically, from what I can understand from their episodes, it started as like a small little church, and maybe like some home groups, home churches in living rooms, I guess. And then there was some sort of what's the word that Seth uses? I can't remember, but crusade. He calls it a crusade. That John Hibbert and maybe even Cyril the prophet, they come to town and they come to Norwich, Connecticut, and basically start teaming up with this group of people. And so it turns into this.
They were from England.
They were from England.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So John Hibbert and Cyril were from England, and they came to the United States on a crusade, and I'm going to guess that this was the 70s. I'm not really sure what year exactly it was, but it was before I was born. I was born in 1982. So I was born into this group, and it was already kind of established from what I can gather.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know. It's like there's a lot of, like, I feel like there was a lot of secrecy. I don't really even know all of the whole history of it.
Right. It's almost like the origin story
is together.
The origin story is obscured for people that have been in it, that are born into it. Like it's like this magical thing that came from nowhere, but like no, it has an origin. So sorry to interrupt you. I just
and it really centers around these two churches, right? There's Bethel Church, that's in England, and then King's Chapel is in Connecticut.
Right.
Yes.
Those are the main bodies.
So basically, the main thing is there were these two sister churches. We called them sister churches. And one was in England, and one was in Connecticut. One was in Norwich, Connecticut. So there was a congregation in Norwich, Connecticut. There was a congregation in Bethel, in England, Mansfield Woodhouse, England. And John Hibbert and Cyril, who was the quote-unquote prophet, they lived in England, and then we had a leadership team here in Norwich, Connecticut, in the United States. And I was born in Connecticut. My parents were already involved in this group. So I grew up in it.
Okay. So
yeah.
I can kind of, if you want, I mean, I listened to the podcast, especially like Seth's story. If you want, I could give some origin of it from what I can remember. And there is actually a Wikipedia.
Sure. Well, I would love for people to listen. Yeah, I would love for people to listen to the podcast themselves and, hear it directly from Seth, and Jocelyn touches on it, Jane touches on it. And then, yes, there are those articles. Right. And then, Wikipedia. And there are those newspaper articles. In 1999, people came out and shared their stories in a newspaper article, and a bunch of people. And they were able to tell their stories. And I really did go through those newspaper articles a lot when I was working on this podcast project, and really those were really the groundwork for the podcast. So I'm really thankful for those newspaper articles. I was actually in the cult at the time when those newspaper articles came out, and I remember the reaction of everyone in the church when those newspaper articles came out. And it was just like, I don't know, just complete denial. And I had to avoid all of the people that were in the newspaper articles, because we were shunned. We had to shun anyone who either said anything negative about the church or left the church, or so that's what we were taught. So we were not able to talk to those people anymore. But I remember in the church, they had a sermon after the newspaper articles came out, and they were kind of talking like they kind of had this sermon that said that, God has like sifted them like wheat or something like that. They were talking about how God kind of sifts out the bad ones and keeps the good ones, and we obviously are the good ones, and that's why we've stayed committed and stayed devoted and stayed in it. And those are the bad ones.
So it seems like that was a common thing to happen, was this ostracization. Was that something that you would experience all the time? Like you would know somebody, you might be friends or family friends, and then all of a sudden like you just could not interact with them anymore?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, that's a common thing with cults.
So you're either all the way in or just all the way out. There's no
right. Well, the Scientologists do that. What is that? Suppressed person or whatever.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
I mean, I think that part of the part of some of this for you, that when you talk about this in your book, is that actually it's funny we mentioned Scientology because you kind of started on this path to this project that you're doing because you watched that Leah Remini special, which I've never watched, but I've seen the documentary Going Clear about Scientology.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that brought back some things to you as well, some memories
Oh,
for
gosh.
you.
Oh gosh, like I can hardly get through the Going Clear documentary. It is so, I mean, when I was watching the Going Clear documentary, my heart was racing so fast. I really was like, you know what, this isn't healthy for me to even watch right now. Like I got through a lot of it, but it was just like, you know, there's only so much I can take right now in this moment, and I feel like I can't take much more. It was, if you're able to even watch one episode of the Leah Remini Scientology in the Aftermath, watch season 1, episode 1. That episode, it was talking about, you know, if you're declared a suppressive person, if you leave the church, then everyone has to shun you and turn their back on you and disconnect from you, stop talking to you. And this is family members, you know? And so everyone's crying on this episode, and it really touched me. It really moved me powerfully. I bawled like a baby, and there was a light bulb that went on when I watched this. And I just thought, I can't believe that this is real, that this happened to me. You know, my family, my mom had to turn her back on me basically and cut ties with me.
It's crazy.
Because I left. I left when I was 18. And also I had to turn my back and stop talking to my dad because he left when I was a junior in high school. And that was a really, really rough thing to go through, very traumatizing thing to go through. And I talk more about that in my episode, which is episode 1, if you want to hear, you know, my whole story.
So some people left voluntarily, right? And then some people were just kicked out pretty much.
I do not know the ins and outs of that. That was actually new information to me when I was doing the podcast project. So, you know, I learned that there were people that were, you know, like there was a person that was outed for being gay and like cast out of the church and like publicly humiliated and shamed. And so, yeah, I'm going to guess that there were lots of people.
You have two people that talk about that same
Jane
incident.
talks about her son. Her son was like cast out of the church, and they were like, "Don't ever be a part of it. You know, don't ever come back." Who else? I can't remember. But yeah, I'm sure it happened.
Let me say this give a little bit of background here about like how this worked. This is from listening to your podcast and just other research that I've done. And it was built around, really, the church was built around this woman named Jean Spademan that everybody called Cyro, correct? And
yes.
She took this name Cyro, I guess it was kind of like an unofficial nickname, from this obscure reference in the Bible to the Syro-Phoenician woman. I don't know what books that's in, but I'll have to look that up off the top of my head. But so she takes this name called Cyro. Now, they called her a prophet, and she said, "Well, I'm not a prophet," and all this kind of thing. But the way that she would work is that she would come up with and it seemed random, just listening to these people's stories. It seemed random to me how she would do this. Like all of a sudden she would say, "You have lust in your heart," or "You have pride in your heart." And she would just pick a random person. And then she would have all like final say on like the naming of people's children. And you even talk about this in your story, how basically she would call people to tell someone else what she was feeling about them, but she would relay that, she would be talking on the phone to that person, and that person would relay that to you. And that was again and again and again and again. And it was all, and they talked about how she would listen to, like, she would watch Jerry Springer. She would read like the National Enquirer. She would have people buy stuff for her. And honestly, truly, if you look at her, the story, like I think it's Hibbert, I think, encounters her, that he goes to save her from these voices that she was hearing. And he casts out these demons, supposedly, right? And then one day, I think this is in Seth's story. She's this is just stuff that stuck with me. She's making a cake, and the recipe calls for 2 eggs, and she hears this voice say 1 egg, and she bakes it with 1 egg, right? And she said, well, that, since she was already cleared of the demons, that was God, obviously, telling her to use 1 egg. And it seems to me like she was schizophrenic. You know, I mean, do you?
Hey, you said it, not me.
Yeah.
I'm not a physician.
Yeah, well, I mean,
So,
if you're hearing voices, something is going on. Something is going on. I mean, just like we talk about a lot of paranormal stuff on this show. We talk about a lot of paranormal stuff on this show, and people hearing voices and that kind of thing. But it's just like, that seemed to me that she had some kind of mental issue. But
I think there are a lot of people that their general consensus is that she may have, yes.
Yeah.
But, for me, I have no idea what the diagnosis is, but obviously there was something harmful going on here in her mind.
Right.
And that's all I know.
But the mind of the
leader
leader
about her
affects everyone else.
There's a thing about her that, Seth describes, a few people might describe it, but where she kind of is 2 different people. Like, she is this loving grandmother that has tons of family, and then in an instant, in a flash, she's this cold, mean, cruel character.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest with you, none of this is easy to talk about, but
I understand. Yep.
This is something that I deal with in my own life, that I can be this warm, wonderful, beautiful, loving, sensitive, vulnerable, innocent, kind of person. And then it's just like, almost just like snap. I don't know. And I always wondered, what is that about me? Because it's just not me, and I realized it is from this environment. That is how a lot of the adults were. That was the environment that I was in. This was common.
So it was like it's being passed down as all
every
modeling.
adult, it's like almost, I don't want to say every single adult, okay? Because I think some of them, I don't know how, they just were just normal and nice. But a lot of them, they're just wonderful, beautiful people, but then in an instant, snap. Like, you don't know what to expect. You don't know. So I grew up always really walking on eggshells because I was scared. I didn't know what to expect from anyone. Like, what if I do something wrong, say something wrong, roll my eyes, do something that's not quote unquote right? Because they were very obsessed. This group of people were very obsessed with being right with God and doing the right thing, thinking the right thoughts, saying the right thing. And they were all very sure, 100%, what they believe is right for me to do and say and act and believe. They were 100% sure that they were. I was potentially. That's how they kind of looked at everybody around them. That's how we were trained to look at each other in this group and to look at ourselves, to be super critical and super judgmental and hard on ourselves and hard on the people around us.
Well,
that was the environment. And I honestly believe that it stemmed potentially all the way up to Syro. And Syro, created this environment. I don't know if it was just her, but I feel like, I think I really still need to dive into that. Like, was it just her, or were there more leaders that were really cultivating this environment where we have to snitch on each other? We have to basically be our brother's keeper and really, I need to focus on Adam and make sure he's saying the right thing, doing the right thing. and he doesn't misbehave. He doesn't do anything out of line. He does the right thing at all times, because I am concerned, and they talk about this in the podcast, you know, like Danielle talks about it. I'm concerned for you that, because this would happen a lot. I'm concerned for you that you're not walking with Jesus, and Jesus is not happy with you. And if you do anything out of line in their eyes, and you don't do something specifically the way that they think you should, and it's all based on their feelings and their thoughts in their mind, and their they went a lot with feeling. Like, I really feel they were very passionate about their feelings, which, you know, in a way, I think that's a good thing, to be really passionate about.
But like everything else, if it's being misused by someone or being misused by a group, it can become a negative thing. And I think what you're talking about there is like the reason why it could be the way it was just maybe like people will go to like people. And you definitely had at the top of this organization, and I wanted to bring this up too. A few shows ago, it's been a few months now, we had this guy on named Alex Simchuk. And Alex did this great documentary called The Slave Circle. And it was about multi-level marketing. And I don't know if you're familiar with that whole world of multi-level marketing, or are you familiar with that kind of?
Tiny bit, yeah.
Yeah. So I would recommend this documentary to you to watch. You can actually find it for free on YouTube or Amazon Prime. It's on there, called The Slave Circle. And Alex basically draws a lot of comparisons to the way the world of multi-level marketing worked to a cult. So basically you have these people that go into like a Walmart or some kind of box store and they sell stuff, right? And they've got to answer to this other person. And then this other person answers to the other person. And everybody's like the higher you go, the more money you make. Well, that sounds normal, right? Most organizations are like that, except at the people at the very bottom are basically slaves being told that they can get something out of what they are doing eventually, that they'll be on the top, which they never actually get there.
Right.
And it works very much like a cult works. A lot of things are designed to kind of make you work so much that it just drags you down. You lose your energy. You lose your heart for anything else. You're just constantly embroiled in this world of multi-level marketing. And it was interesting to me, I think this was in Danielle's story, that King's Chapel starts to use these multi-level marketing techniques, where like she had 12 people that she would disciple under her, and then she had someone over her. And it's just like the world of occult and multi-level marketing are just like now cross-pollinating each other. And so they work very much the same way. And there was in your podcast where they just talked about how basically you had the one guy that owned the tire store that was one of the elders, I guess, of the church. He had
the minister, the head pastor.
He had people working for him for free. For free, because he just had them believing. And
there's things about, sorry to cut you off. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay. It's okay.
There were people that would come from England and volunteer at his business. I think that was a common thing. I remember the day that I guess he started to get in trouble for that. I'm not really sure exactly what happened, but I remember my mom coming home one day and just saying, I remember this clearly, and I don't have a ton of memories. But I do remember this clearly. She came home and was like, this is really, really bad. We're not going to be able to work for free anymore and do the work of the Lord. And we're going to have to get paid. And, some people that are like in sin and not following Jesus have to ruin it for everyone, basically, is the gist of what she was saying. Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
But what you were saying before about the multi-level marketing thing, Danielle is a person that I actually grew up with. Danielle, she was one of my neighbors, and she was one of my high school friends. And I have talked to her outside of the recording, and I was like, am I the one that sucked you in? You know, am I the person that called and was like, come on, Danielle, let's go to, you know, are you committed? Are you devoted or not? Because I know we were all trained to do that. And I had to recruit people, and we all were really trained to do that. But she ended up actually joining the church and being a part of it while I was basically on my way out. And so she was in there after I was in there, basically. And the multi-level marketing thing that she starts talking about with the disciples and stuff, I didn't even know about any of that until she said it on the recording. I remember that my mom was talking about cell groups randomly, but I didn't know anything what she was talking about. But Danielle, when I heard her recording, or not heard her recording, when I did the recording with her and interviewed her, and she was talking about this, I was really surprised. I had no idea about that. That was after my time. But I will say that I have always felt that there was some sort of totem pole, and I felt like my family was really on the bottom. I never felt that I felt that there definitely was ranking, and there was definitely some sort of hierarchy, and the leaders were at the top. The person with the business, there were actually two leaders that had businesses. They were at the top. And in England, it was John Hibbert and the Prophet. And basically, there were the leaders and the leaders' families. The families were at the top as well. And Cyro had a lot of kids and a lot of grandkids. And we were all friends with all of them. And those people I felt were at the top. But I've talked to a lot of those people. After I've done this podcast, a lot of them have reached out to me. I've been reached out to by a lot of people.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people, even Cyro's relatives and everything, a lot of them are like, you know, I did not feel like I was at the top at all of anything. In fact, I felt that I was the one under the microscope even more, and I was under a lot of scrutiny. I think that even the people at the top were put through hell too. It wasn't that they escaped the criticism and the fear tactics and the pressure and control. I don't think that anyone escaped it, even the people at the top. Because I can look at them and just say, like, they, you know, were on this completely different level, but I think that they were all in the game. And it was anybody could turn on anyone, and as Seth says, anyone could go rabid on anybody.
It just trickles down.
And that's what we were taught to do.
I think that it only works for just a small amount of people, maybe 2 or 3 people at the top, and that's really who it really works for. It doesn't work for it might not even work for their families. One of the things that I think Seth talks about, where he's saying that they would go to do these, cast out these principalities in a location. Right, you know, the powers of principalities, I guess, from the book of I guess it's Ephesians or whatever.
Yeah, the darkness, the power, the power of principalities, So
they would go and they would do this, and one of the things that he talks about, the incidents he talks about, was they went to Alaska, and they stayed at this incredibly expensive hotel. They had to have always like the nicest place, the nicest hotel. You had a need would come out into the church, and they would say, oh, we have this need, so we need everybody to give something, and it would end up being like a $20,000 trip to Disney World for an entire family of the people at the top. And it's just, and then you talk about like that whole thing about informing. I mean, that's basically what it is. You're taught to inform on each other, and it's a totalitarian society, really. I mean, it's just like Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia or Stalin. I mean, it's the same thing.
I was just thinking about it today. I was just like, you know what? We are literally capable of believing anything. Because look at Nazi Germany. You know, I mean, we are literally humans. We are capable of believing anything. We really I don't want to say we all really need to question our beliefs, but I don't think it could hurt for anyone to question their belief system or question things that they've been believed or thought for a long time, because humans are not always right. And we look back and we realize, oh, maybe that wasn't so great. But, this whole group of people, they really thought that they were right. They really thought that God called them to be a light on the hill, and everyone else was kind of at the bottom of the hill. And when I say everyone else, I mean everyone else in the entire world on this planet. This is the only little church, or churches, 2 churches, that were called to be the light on the hill, according to these people. And they were the only ones that were truly saved and true Christians. That's what I believed for a long time. And
we're the elect.
Yeah. So we're the only ones that know the right way. And we have the true Jesus and the true message. And, there was just this air. When I think back, there was just this air about these leaders and these people and the adults. And a lot of them, you could just almost feel the dense egos. I know what's right and I am superior. You could, I couldn't feel it. I couldn't communicate what it was or think about what it was at the time, but now I look back and it's just ugh. And what's so crazy is they would preach about pride and arrogance, and it's it's so crazy now. This blows my mind. The things that they preached about and the things that we prayed against, and the things we were so focused on, sexual purity and being right with God, and just all these things, we were actually it just boggles my mind. They were so focused on purity and
those
righteousness.
Those things were being projected by people. People were projecting their own problems.
They were projecting their own darkness.
Yeah.
I look back and it's just I was so terrified as a kid in this environment. It felt like a horror movie. That's how it felt to me. I was always so afraid because they were always talking about, that there was this spiritual war, spiritual battle going on, and that this was number one priority in my life, was to fight against the devil and
yeah.
To fight against the demons and the sin and the evil and the darkness. And it's it turns out to be they were the darkness. These things that they were believing that they were putting into my life, that was the darkness, They
became what they're fighting against.
They were the thing that they were fighting against. And I think that's what boggles my mind. It still blows me away to think about it. When I'm going through this healing and I'm just, kind of going through my thoughts, where is this thought coming from? And it stems from something like that. It just blows me away. They, for example, the sexual purity thing, they were so all about sexual purity and righteousness and blah, 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 that they basically, high pressure, they were so obsessed with it, that they were obsessed with this sexual sin, that they forced people and pressured people to admit to these crazy sins. Things that people did not do. And so it got to a point where they were
the one lady, the good case in point was the one lady that she was told that you have your sexual desire for your own children, and just
there were people, there was
they wanted these weird confessions because they were vicariously getting off on it. It's one of those things where it's just what the heck happened there? That is very disgusting.
That's disgusting. They forced this person hours and hours of interrogation in the night to confess to doing something she didn't do, which was have sexual thoughts for her own children, okay, which is crazy. And then they forced her to, sleep on the floor like a dog, and then they cast her. Oh yeah, that's the person. They cast her out of the church, and she was homeless.
Yeah.
And then she didn't even get to have a relationship with her daughters for many, 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 many years. And, oh my goodness, it's sick. you know, that they were so concerned about purity and righteousness and fighting against sin, but look at what they were doing. They were monsters, destroying this person's life. Now, they didn't look at it that way. They thought they were in the right. They thought they knew everything. They thought that, you know, their ego was on the top. They thought they were superior, and they knew what's right. They knew what's best. They didn't think that they were in the wrong.
They were convinced
time,
of
obviously.
it. They were convinced of
They
it.
were convinced. They believed
Yeah.
this. They
Right.
believed this. Yeah, it's just nuts.
Do you mind talking about how you left?
Sure. So I decided to leave when I turned 18. Well, it was before I turned 18. I was basically waiting to turn 18 because I was trying to figure out how in the world I was going to be able to get out. I ran away several times. One of the times that I ran away, I still have nightmares about this. Actually, I have nightmares a lot about running away. And I have nightmares about, you know, running all over and trying to hide. And, but one time that I ran away, it was because everyone lived in the same, it was kind of weird. Everyone lived within walking distance. So, you know, where I lived, by the time I left, I lived like a few houses down from all the pastors and from lots of people, leaders, elders in the church. So I hid in bushes at one point when I was trying to run away, and I was waiting for my ride, my school friend to pick me up and us, you know, drive away together. And I have nightmares, and I don't know if it's 100% true because sometimes my memory is fuzzy, and I don't know if something is 100% true. And then it's like, you know, I hear it happen to someone else on this podcast, and then it's like I'm kind of validated that, hey, this was true. But I have nightmares a lot about hiding in the bushes and there being like flashlights, and I couldn't hear voices of people being like, you know, have you looked for her there? No, let's go look here, you know. So I kind of have this faint feeling that, you know, I was being searched for. But I didn't include that information in my book because it's like I don't want to include any information that I don't know is 100% accurate. And,
Right.
You know,
right.
But these are the things that, like, you know, I mean, so I may, after this conversation, someone might call me and say, hey, I remember you did, you know, we were searching for you. You were in the bushes, you know. But I did run away several times, and I was trying to get out. I was in my, do you want me to talk about my trip to England? You
Sure.
can hear a
Yeah.
lot of my story
Yeah.
when you listen to my episode. And I do think that you'll get more from listening to the people will get more, the listeners will get more from listening to my
you've
episodes
got
than
like
to
it's
hear
like-
me talk about it, because it's very difficult for me to like tell the whole story.
Yeah, I think you've got like 8 hours of testimony basically on that
Yeah.
on that podcast so far. So
Yeah. But basically I applied for college behind my mom's back. At that time, I was not talking to my dad because he had left the church, and the story is in episode 1 of my podcast, my story. It's really hard for me to go through, tell the whole thing again, but you can definitely listen to it, and I'll give you kind of what's it called?
synopsis.
Synopsis. There you go. And, but yeah, I applied to college behind my mom's back when I turned 18. College was not really a thing that the group encouraged. If you wanted to go to college, it was kind of more something, if you go to community college, they might let you go, but you have to run that by people. You can't just go to college. You can't just choose what career you want. You can't choose to even really be involved with hobbies or and if it's going to have anything to do with distracting you from kind of putting the group first, then it's going to probably be a problem. So you had to put your dedication and your commitment and your priority, your loyalty first to the group. So if anything got in the way of that, because you had to be there like all the time and spend a lot of hours there, then, it was a problem. So they definitely didn't really believe in going to college like away from home. Like, you had to either commute. There's no way you can leave and just go across the country and go to college. Like, that is not going to happen. So that's why I applied to college behind my mom's back. I waited till I was 18 so that I didn't need her to sign off on it, and I didn't need her permission. And then when I got the acceptance letter in the mail, I knew I was free, and I basically waited until the last possible second and told her that I was leaving, and I left. And people did try to stop me. One of the leaders did try to stop me and kind of threaten me. And then I left, and when I went to college, I called my mom, and she cut ties with me on the phone. She just told me, she was really disappointed in the path that I chose to take, and that I wasn't following Jesus anymore, and Jesus wasn't happy with me. Because what they believed in this group was you had to do exactly what this group of people believed, basically the leaders, what they believed, or else Jesus hates you. And they said a lot that if you are in sin and something happens to you and you die, then it is most likely that God, when you get to heaven, God will say, I never knew you. Depart from me, I never knew you. And they would say that all the time. That was a common thing. So everyone was really afraid of losing their salvation and not being right with God. And if something happens that you're in sin and you do something wrong, then God is not happy with you. And if you die, you will go to hell. And God will be like, I never knew you. And he will absolutely turn his back on you. And that was just like the major belief in this place. And so it was just a lot of fear, because you constantly had to think about, what am I doing right now? What am I thinking about right now? Because if you don't think, act, and say things that they want you to perfectly, the way that they deem is right and correct and perfect, then they are going to show up and say, I saw this and I think you're not doing well with Jesus. Like, your relationship with Jesus is not doing well. And they're very passionate about that. And so I was just always walking on eggshells with anything I did or said. But then at the end, I just started to just not believe it anymore, because I just felt like this isn't love. Like, this is not kind at all. Like, I can't do it. I can't be a part of it. If God is real, there's no way that he just hates everybody, and there's just this angry thing in the clouds that is just can't wait to just say, depart from me, I never knew you.
At a certain point, like
I
the
just
programming
don't
broke
believe
for
it.
you.
Yeah, at some point. And yeah, and then the whole Syro thing, I just started to just not believe in that anymore. I went to England. I was promised a trip to go to England. And that was a big thing. You'll hear about this in the podcast. People went back and forth to England. I went there several times to go to weddings. And also, if someone, they had no problem breaking up a marriage. And if one person was kind of more committed than the other person, then they would just send the committed person to England and then just kind of get the other person to get out. I feel like that is potentially what happened with my parents. My parents basically broke up while I was in England. So what happened was, I was promised this trip to go to England, which is supposedly this honor. And now I'm finding out that this happened to a lot of kids my age. I was a teenager. I was a junior in high school. When I got to England, I thought that I was going on this vacation, and when I got there, I got a call from Syro, who is the prophet, and, you know, basically she said that I was in sin, and that's what would happen is, like, we would get random calls from people. People would show up at my house, you know, you're in sin. People would take me aside at church or wherever I am, because the group was always together. The people were always together at each other's houses and stuff. It was a very much close-knit community of people. I mean, almost like a family. And we very much were always in each other's bums. We were in each other's faces a lot. And knew each other, you know, like Jane describes, we knew each other's weaknesses. So, I mean, they would harp on people left and right. We would turn on each other, snitch on each other, whatever. But Syro, this is one thing about Syro, okay? You know, she used to guess things. And a lot of times I think that the guessing came from the prayer meetings, because people would have these, like, prayer meetings, and I would hear people say, like, please pray for Johnny. You know, Johnny is not in sin, you know, and is not walking with the Lord. He's in sin. He's having a hard time. And then all of a sudden, it's like Johnny would get a phone call, and it's like, the Lord has told me that you're in sin. And it's like, oh, you know, I started to, like, kind of notice that stuff happening, and I'm like, okay, this is no miracle. This is no surprise. Like, I just witnessed this woman talking about Johnny, like, 2 days ago, or, you know, whoever.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
Like, I started piecing that together, okay? And then I started, like, you know, like, if someone prayed in the prayer meeting, like, I have this miracle that I need, this need that I need met of, you know, I need groceries, and I don't know how it's going to happen. And then it's like groceries appear on their doorstep the next day. It's just, you know, when that stuff started to happen, it's like it's like I started piecing things together slowly, you know? It's just slowly started piecing things together. I can't even tell you, like, there was a specific moment where I was like, I don't believe this anymore, but it was just kind of like, you know, over time I was just like, I don't know, you know? And then finally when I was in England, Syro, you know, she guessed wrong. And I think that happened to a lot of people. It's like she guessed her sins. You know, sometimes when she guesses, she's right. Kind of. Like, it's like you can see that. Like, they know your weaknesses, so it's like, you know, they may have heard about what you did at the prayer meeting. So they might be guessing right. And then, so you're like, oh, crap, God knew. And then, but she basically, when I was in England, she guessed wrong. The price is wrong.
Yeah, but it essentially didn't matter whether she guessed wrong or right, because everybody was just going to follow what she said anyway.
Yeah, but
you know, so it had consequences.
Oh, it definitely, absolutely had consequences, no matter what.
But that lets you sow seeds of doubt.
Believe it, because if a leader or if someone takes you aside, or if Syro takes you aside, or if anybody takes you aside and says, you're in sin, you did this, this is on my, a lot of them would say, this is on my heart, and I'm really feeling this, Adam. I'm really feeling from the Lord that you did something that's not right, you know, and it's just, and a lot of it would be not tangible things, like, I really feel like you have a lot of pride and arrogance, Adam, and you really need to repent, Adam. And it would be really like this high-pressure, passionate, emotional, like, I'm looking into your eyes and I really believe this. and also, if you do not say, I'm sorry, and go through the repentance process, you're in worse trouble. Like, we're going to have to call in backup here. We're going to have to get backup involved.
Because then you definitely got pride.
It's psychological torture is what it is.
Yeah.
It was psychological torture, and I really feel like I was a lot of times in this kind of situation where I was on trial, or I was some sort of, what's the word? I was under investigation, or like like I can picture, when I think of my childhood, I think of like FBI investigation, a like flashlight in my face. Like, it's not that they had a physical flashlight in my face, but it's like that's what it was like. It felt like just like I could be cornered at any time. And people would ask questions, and they really didn't have a lot of boundaries. So I could ask you, Adam, how's your relationship with Jesus going? And if whatever you say, if you say, oh, it's going really good, I could say, Adam, that really sounds prideful to me or something, you know. Or if you say it's not going very well, I say, well, then Adam, oh my goodness, then you really need to, you know, get right with God and repent, you know. So it's like, there are no right answers, okay?
Right. Because it's not about that. Ultimately, it's just about whether it's conscious or subconscious. It's just honestly just about just establishing this control and this dominance, so that this system that they have set up continues. And
at that point, all you want to do is stay out of trouble. You don't really think about anything else except, what can I do to stay out of trouble in this moment? And what can I do to protect myself? And
which, a lot of that is probably past the buck then, and just look for other people to blame for stuff, like to take the spotlight off of you.
I don't know. You know, I don't really remember. I just remember, you know, I don't really remember what my responses would be. I just remember freezing up and a lot, and just feeling, you know, what's so crazy? It's like, I don't remember a lot of things, but I remember the feelings that I had in this place and around certain people. And I just remember being so scared that something bad was going to happen to me. And that was just the feeling a lot. And they even preached about that a lot. Like, just, you know, they just wanted, there was a lot of fear involved with this. You just had to almost feel inferior, like, in order to stay safe. Like, feel inferior and, like, be a servant of Jesus. They said that you have to really be a servant and have a servant's heart. That was a big thing. And I think the more inferior that you show people that you feel and that you believe about if you hate yourself, basically, then they're going to kind of raise you up and make you feel good and say, like, Jesus is happy with you because you're having such a horrible time, you're struggling, you're suffering, and obviously you're doing a great job because the devil feels threatened and he's come to your home to, like, you know, steal, kill, and destroy, but he's against you because you've done well, because you're this faithful servant. So it's like they praised you if you were if you were, you know, submissive and inferior.
Right. Because that's how they maintain control, and that's how they could get people to work for free, and how they could get people to help put them up in large hotels and the nicest hotels imaginable, and trips to Disney World.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it's just all manipulation and psychological control. I wonder sometimes, and I think, you know, I just wonder sometimes with these cult leaders, and I think these cult leaders in general, whether or not some of them really believe what they're saying. Because, like, L. Ron Hubbard is I think a good example.
Oh my God.
I wonder if I think
Hubbard.
I think Hubbard was just like, I don't think he believed a word of his own BS. I think
really?
he'd even made statements of just like, I need to start a religion and I'll make a lot of money out of it, you know?
Yeah, I know. I know. But, you know, yeah, that's true I remember hearing that. But you want to hear something that's crazy is John Hibbert really reminds me of L. Ron Hubbard. Like, I feel like they remind me of each other a little bit, but I actually loved John Hibbert. And I think, like, I loved him. When I was a little kid, I absolutely loved him. I didn't see him very often. So when he came to town, I was, like, really excited. He was kind of like this, you know, how do I explain this? He was just kind of almost like a celeb almost. When he came to visit. I just absolutely loved him, and he was sweet to me. He never did anything specifically to me that, you know what I mean? Like, I was
Right.
probably too low on the totem pole for him to, you know, actually give me a call. And also I was a child, and he was probably maybe more concerned with the adults.
Yeah,
But
the
I know that
charismatic leader.
he was definitely a charismatic leader. And if you can look him up, anybody that's listening, you can look him up, and there are preachings. They might trigger you big time if you've dealt with this kind of religious trauma or abuse or whatever. But his sermons, some of his sermons are online for you to watch, and you can tell he's extremely passionate about the Bible and his beliefs. Very, very passionate. And I think that was a big key thing in this place. Everyone was filled with a lot of zeal, and they were very devoted and very... When you asked about the leaders, I know the leaders in Connecticut, you know, I don't understand. If that's the $1 million question. Like, I don't understand. Did they get off on this? Did they enjoy this? Like, did they just have no idea? Like, were they just following and they had no idea how much this was going to damage and affect people? And, you know, I'm not sure. You know, I don't think that they were aware of how much damage these beliefs were going to cause. I'm really not sure. I think their ego was so large and puffed up that they were probably just like, you know what? I'm doing the right thing. I'm helping this world because look at me. I have all the right answers. And if you join me, I think they really believed it. I think they did.
Yeah, I think that's the fine line. That's what I wonder. I think it's a case-to-case basis because if you look at, like, you know, I think David Koresh believed everything he was saying, you know?
Yeah, and I you know, it's like our egos will believe anything. If it makes us feel superior, makes us feel better about ourselves, you know what I mean? Like, we have to keep it in check, you know? Like, are our thoughts really, like, making us feel better than other people or making us control other people? Or when it comes to a point where it's like, I know the right way and it's black and white, and you have to do what I say or else you will not be accepted and loved, and, you know, that's where there's no way that I can believe that crap anymore. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help anyone. It has only hurt people.
Let me ask you this because we're getting kind of low on time, but I wanted to ask you, you know, this was 20 years ago, your experience. So is this group still, are they still around? I mean, you know, like, are they, I mean, I wouldn't think that they're that big of a group.
It was not a big group. It was a small independent group. So like a few hundred people here and a few hundred people in England.
Yeah.
So I want to challenge anybody that's listening that's interested in this group, that's fascinated by this group and captivated by this story of this group, to look up what happened in England, because, and I don't want to give it away too much, but the church that in England did dissolve because there was a huge dramatic thing, and it's in the newspapers and on the news and everything. There's a huge dramatic thing that happened. Basically, it looks like, you know, I wasn't there, but it looks like what happened was, and this is very, very recent, like last year, it looks like what happened was they were putting on this huge production, like Broadway kind of type musical, and just asking the congregation to just give tons and tons and tons of money, and it just ended up backfiring on them. And the show looks like it went bankrupt, and they owed a lot of money. Like, I think it was like John Hibbert or something. They owed a lot of money. So you can look that up, look into that. It's interesting to see what happened there. I would love to, if this podcast does continue, I'm trying to grow the audience and see where it goes. But if this podcast does continue, I would love to dive into that and ask people, because I haven't had anyone from England on yet.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in England are, because it just shut down, like the church in England. So
So there might be some
I think a lot
aftermath of
people
that.
are still. I think that they're still dealing with the aftermath of that. There's still probably a lot of shock, and it just a lot of them have said to me, like, I just want to move on. I just want to move on. I just want to stop talking about it. I guess it was in the newspaper and the news, and it's just kind of a big thing over there. But unfortunately, it's been like 20 years, and I still haven't moved on. And so if you've only been out for a year, I doubt you're able to just move on just like that, because the way that I was programmed as a child to think certain things, to believe certain things about myself and the world and the people around me, and it just, it affects me every day, almost all day, every day. And I'm unraveling it. It's like an onion. I'm peeling back the layers. There's just like a billion layers so far. And it's been 20 years, So I'm really diving into this healing, but, you can't just move on. You can't just wish it away. You can't just pretend like it never existed, or just say, I'm going to get a puppy and move on. It's not that easy. You have to face what this thing really was, and you have to face all of the demons, all of the darkness, and accept it before you can really be able to start moving on and deprogram yourself, from these crazy beliefs.
Yeah, that was
still working on
something.
it.
That was something that when we talked to Alex Simchuk with the multi-level marketing stuff, I mean, he still pretty much uses the language like it's ingrained into him, the same language that they would use. And, speaking to you, when you're giving me the examples of how they would do what they would do to people, how they would psychologically torture, you picked that up. You're like, you can do it.
I did it to you for a minute there. I was on fire.
Did. Yeah. So it's like
I really felt the spirit of it, because I can get into that mode if I want to, because I was surrounded by all of these people that we all had the same. We all did it. We all could do it to each other, and it was almost like the spirit of Satan or the spirit of Syro or whatever you want to call it. It was this. I'm going to turn on you, and you're a piece of crap unless you do what I say.
It's
because I know what's right and you don't.
It's fascinating to me, and listening to your podcast is fascinating in so many ways. But one of the ways it fascinated me of just like, it's foreign to me as someone that didn't grow up in something like this. I grew up in just normal churches. I didn't go to church for a long time, but it's fascinating to me just how people will just abdicate their will, their responsibility, and it's unbelievable to me because I don't understand it. But talking to you and reading your book, and I've listened to your podcast, it's just like it becomes their world. It becomes who they are. It becomes what they are.
I mean, is that the more natural state though? Because is that the tribal way of thinking? Are we kind of the exception?
Those things can be used. Yeah.
When you're in this environment, it's definitely not going to work well for you to think outside the box and to question yourself, question anything, or, you can't doubt anything, or you'll get in trouble. So you're just a little too afraid to, think for yourself. But then when you get outside of the group and you realize that you have the freedom to, think whatever the heck you want to think, and there's like literally no repercussions, and you don't have to be afraid anymore. It's really a beautiful thing, but it still feels like this unpopular thing because we live in the Bible Belt, so it's really like unpopular for me to be like, what is it that I believe now? Like, do I believe that Jesus died on the cross and rose again from my sins? Because I've been taught for so many years. If you do not believe that and Jesus Christ is not your Lord and Savior, like, you are absolutely, that is not the popular decision here. Then that is not like, a lot of people are going to judge you. A lot of people are going to put you in a box and label you and feel sorry for you and tell you, try to save you. And so I'm still like dealing with this, like, of like, am I really free to believe what I want to believe? And like, it's not easy to to say I'm not going to put pressure on myself to believe what the popular belief system is. It's still really scary for a lot of people. And a lot of people have, like, conservative Christian, like where I live, it's, you know, a lot of people still have that conservative Christian views of everything. And, you know, it's really difficult to work with that, to deal with that. It really is, especially around the holidays. And I know, like, there's just a lot of things that trigger me, and I think there's a lot of things that trigger a lot of people. And, you know, we're very sensitive beings, and I'll just speak for myself. I was a very, very sensitive child, and I'm realizing now how sensitive I really was. I really couldn't handle that environment. It was very negative for me. It was very fearful for me. I was full of fear all the time, and I'm still undoing that. I'm still working on that. And now it's like I'm dealing with, you know, feeling triggered a lot of the time. And yeah, there's a really big consequence to this group. I'm living it. And a lot of people in the second generation, I'm not alone. They're really suffering and struggling in certain ways. You know, my brother and then some of my little friends that I had in the church were all struggling in different ways. And it's unfortunate. It really is.
Well, it sounds like
stuff is happening.
Yeah, the book and your podcast, though, is going to be really positive, you know, because it lets the other former members, you know that that you can, you know, speak out about it, or they'd have other people to talk to, and you know, kind of sounds like you've already kind of got an informal kind of support group around it.
Yeah, it's therapeutic for you too, what you're doing.
Yes, I think that is so true. You know, this the last episode is this, you know, the season finale. Bane talks about, you know, doing whatever it takes to be kind to yourself, to heal yourself. And, you know, I'm learning to love myself and things like that. And I'm able to share my story. And it is encouraging people. It's inspiring people to share their story, to dive into their healing, to look at these things, to not be in denial anymore. And I have this Instagram that I just started. I'm just, like, figuring out what the heck I want to do with it. But basically, I'm trying to share my story and share how, you know, what's helping me deprogram myself and heal from this stuff. Because every day I do face these things. But I have had a lot of support, and I'm extremely thankful for that. The prior members of this group are extremely supportive, and they're wonderful. They've been wonderful. And also my listeners of my podcast and the people who have purchased my book, I'm so appreciative of people that listen to this podcast and purchase my book, because it feels so supportive. It feels so good, because there was just, for so long, I felt so alone. So to know that there are people that can relate or be inspired or encouraged or whatever from hearing my story and hearing my journey here with this, and then also hearing, you know, obviously the other contributor stories, hearing the story of this place, and then also hearing my journey of how I'm healing and trying to undo this stuff, the psychological stuff. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. And I hope that if there are any listeners that and say hello, I would love that, and connect with people that, you know, it's really embarrassing and not easy to admit this stuff. You know, that you're dealing with trauma. It is actually extremely humiliating and embarrassing. It feels humiliating and embarrassing, because I feel like there is a stigma with it. I mean, if you told me right now that you were dealing with that stuff, I would probably initially judge you. I mean, but that's probably just because of where I came from with this group. But I feel like there's still this stigma on anything related to mental health still, you know? Like, you still think of, like, 1950s, like, I'm going to commit you, like, into you're insane. You know, I still feel like that's there a little bit. But
yeah, I agree.
I'm so proud of where our humanity has come with that, with where I can talk about this stuff and not be burned to a, you know, on a stake. You know, like, we can talk about this and there is freedom of speech, and I'm not going to be burned, and I'm safe, and like, we've come really far, so I'm like super thankful for that.
Well, Naomi,
I'm thankful I can, you know, connect with people and stuff and talk about this stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're glad that you're out there doing it. I highly recommend the podcast. Where can people find the show and also get your book?
So the book is on Amazon. It's called The Cult in My Living Room. And the podcast is on pretty much any podcast platform. Most, you know, the major ones. And it's called Cult in Connecticut. And yeah, you can find me on Instagram under Naomi Van Winkle. And I'm really working on growing the audience so I can hopefully do season 2 maybe. And also, I'm working on more writing because I need to write a longer book. The book is short, but I really appreciate anybody who does listen and who does purchase it and listen to my story. I really, really, really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, I think that it's a good start for sure.
Absolutely.
It's a good start. I'm not a Pulitzer Prize winner just yet. I'm not a New York Times bestseller just yet, but that's the goal. Someday.
You got to start somewhere. I think it's good to bring awareness of this. Thank you, Naomi. We're going to close this section out. Stay on the line for us. And guys, we'll be right back to close out the show on Conspirinormal. You're back.
And you may have noticed a slight change somewhere in there in audio quality because we had a bit of a technical difficulty with these the way that these podcasts, hours and hours of recorded 24-bit waves take up space. So one of my hard drives tapped out. I didn't realize it was getting close.
Yeah, he filled up his entire 1 terabyte hard drive, guys. So it's a lot of Conspirinormal. That's a lot of Conspirinormal. It's a lot on there of Conspirinormal goodness. So that was an interesting show with Naomi about cults. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sounds like it's a pretty traumatizing experience. Besides that, we have a lot of these people in our country because we have this religious freedom, and that that's
the irony.
I mean, even I'm saying, like, even as cynical as you want to be about this experiment, it is, if nothing else, like Mitch Harwood talks about, it's for religious experimentation and freedom. So we have to balance that. I don't know how. A lot of times we're seeing some of the worst abuse in the most mainstream of religions in this country and around the world. So I really don't like to see a lot of people kind of going after small, more marginal groups because they seem strange. That seems real un-American to me. But at the same time, how do we catch illegal and abusive behaviors? And what is that? What is that line? It's really.
I think you got to be vigilant. I think if anyone, anywhere is being exploited in any way, I don't care by who it is. Even if they want to be exploited, they shouldn't be being exploited. That's just, I'm sorry. That's kind of how I would kind of think
but
about
how
it.
do you, people are volunteering for churches all the time. Doing work for free. It's like, where do you draw this line? I understand there has to be a line, but it's tough. I definitely feel sorry for all the people who are victimized by
and are still probably being victimized by this group,
and others like it, and mainstream religions. But it's just the most important thing, I think, is to just educate yourself on these different religions before you join them. And I think that's really great. That's what she's really doing.
Yeah, I definitely her doing this and bringing this out to the forefront is she's doing something that I think no one else is, at least in that group that has been in there, has been doing. And I think definitely using that, the podcast medium to do it, I think is a great idea. And I think it's just going to be people's awareness of what is going on. I mean, this group has has had a lot of problems, and a lot of government agencies in Britain, and but mostly in England, they put him on that they were, what was it called? It's actually on here in the Book of Knowledge page, where it talks about the British MP calls for group to be placed on register.
Yeah.
So in 2000, after critical reporting on organization exposed controversial practices by the group, British MP for Mansfield, Alan Mill, publicly requested that such religious groups and cults be placed in a register.
See, but I mean, I don't know if I'm comfortable with something like that. I mean, that's not,
yeah.
but that is another country who does not have the, the extreme religious freedom that we have.
Well, even Naomi had talked about how that, that tire place, the guy's tire place, got in a lot of trouble for not paying people.
Yeah.
For having basically, essentially, slave labor.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it was. And that's, I don't know, man. Yeah, I mean, I know you're right about that fine line thing, but it's like, I think
that's illegal. That's illegal. When you're breaking the law, you're breaking the law.
Yeah, right. When you're breaking the law, you're breaking the law.
You're physically abusing people, you're breaking the law. When you're having people work regular non-profit business for free, you're breaking the law.
Yeah, exactly.
You're holding people against their will, you're breaking the law. So that's the line. But it's just I think the fine line is in like who gets targeted for what reasons, so it's pretty wild. But I'm definitely not a fan of cults. I'm just saying.
Yeah. And my other takeaway from that is, from this interview, is I wonder the people that are really the people that are in charge of this, how much they actually believe, whether they believe that they are doing the right thing, or that there's some kind of more pragmatic interest involved, where they just realize, hey, we got this good racket going where we can just make these people work for us. I think there might be a little bit of both.
Here's something I think also about a lot of these cults. I think a lot of this becomes like, I don't think necessarily a lot of these cult leaders set out to create a cult, but I think they get tempted by the subservience of people around them. And then they're like, holy shit, I can just do what I want. Holy shit, I can, I think a lot of it comes from, I'm not trying to blame the victim, but I think a lot of it comes from people tolerating their behaviors. We talked about that. And then like how some of these people at the top seem like they have these extreme pathologies that are then like mimicked, and it trickles down, and then these people model after their personalities. But I think a lot of people don't set out to create cults. I think they're just trying to do the usual, what might still be exploitative, charismatic leader thing, and then they just get tempted by the subservience of their flock.
Yeah, it becomes this self-perpetuating,
just get drunk on power
machine.
Yeah,
eventually, and everybody else. There's probably other people that think, well, I can get further. I could probably become like the leadership. And the more that you try to model yourself off the leadership, the more you might move up.
Right.
So it probably becomes more of this kind of subconscious kind of attitude that's in that church, in that insular little world.
And there's a lot of that, even in more mainstream religion in the States, where like she said, how sheltered she was. Like I still meet people all the time who like are just so unfamiliar with things that I think is like such basic parts of American culture.
And it's unbelievable too.
And they're like, they've just been totally shut off from it.
Yeah, that's there's also with this interview, guys. You may have noticed there were some things that she did not want to talk about because a lot of this stuff is very personal to her. And so I did my best to kind of fill in some of the gaps there, but I also at the same time I think we got a lot out of her. I think eventually we were able to pull some things out.
We should definitely go check out the podcast because it's really good.
Yeah, check it out, guys. It really will blow your mind. It's absolutely fascinating. Just the stories, it's unbelievable. To think that for me personally, as someone that really believes in like free will, to think that people would just abdicate that. But once you're in it, it's a totally different thing, I think. Looking outside and being in are two totally different aspects. Mm-hmm. Was there anything else that we wanted to add about that before we call it?
I don't know, that extreme tribalism, that us versus them versus the outside world thing. It's fascinating to me how many of these groups exist, and that's like I think that's just the price we pay, unfortunately, for our extreme religious freedom, which I totally support.
Yeah.
But you have abuses of it, just like the abuses of all the other freedoms. So
I'd like to do a fuller thing maybe sometime, maybe one of those extra Patreon segments that we've talked about.
Cult profiles,
about doing
that's a
just
cool
like
thing.
Talking about just like various kind of cults, and because there's some interesting ones that are still out there.
Mm-hmm.
The Children of God cult,
which is notorious.
Yeah.
For abuse.
Yeah. Like River Phoenix and Joaquin Phoenix, they were part of that.
Yeah, as a
that came out of the whole like Jesus freak movement.
Yeah.
In the 60s.
Right.
And it just transformed into just basically this huge like sex ring.
Yeah, one that I've been interested in for a long time is Brother Stairs ministry.
Yeah.
Which I first heard him on like AM radio way back in the day, talking about there never were any dinosaurs, and he'd always talk all this crazy shit. And then as I got into shortwave listening, I would they'd have like 6 frequencies bought up at the same time, going simultaneously all night long across the world. The Overcomer Ministry is, I think, what it is called. He's this compound in South Carolina. I'm not sure if he's in prison now or not. He's just in and out of prison for abuse. He's like the end time preacher, says he's the last prophet of God. And he's extremely charismatic speaker and gets into all the conspiracy mythos and, mixed in with the end time stuff. And so it's real fascinating. Unfortunately, it's like it was an old habit of mine to just like listen to him because it's so entertaining, but it's creepy shit.
On the shortwave.
Yeah.
Was there something that he was doing one night where like he had a whole bunch of like sirens going off or some weird shit like that you sent me? Or
oh, he played like one of those fake emergency broadcast things about like the government coming in and kicking your door down and all that kind of shit. And
Yeah, it was like Alex Jones to like the nth degree.
Yeah, but you can only be saved through him because he's the last day prophet of God.
Of course. He's the only way.
But yeah, that'd be a profile on cults would be a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, we should look into doing that, and that's what we're going to be doing coming into the new year. We're going to be trying
stuff like that.
To do those kind of episodes that are little standalone episodes, but we're only going to put those on Patreon. So if you would like to become a Patreon, it is all there. Go to patreon.com/Conspirinormal and you can join up. Right now we have that up there for now for as little as $1. We may be changing that. We're not entirely sure, but we're just trying to figure out ways that if you guys love the show, if you love to keep us doing what we are doing, which is I know that's a spiel that you hear often, but it's true. Please go on there, support us. It's a little as $1. Even if we moved up to $3, it's still less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Yeah,
just think about it that way.
And
that's only once a month,
guys. We got some cool T-shirts. I've not been seeing enough people taking advantage of that.
Oh yeah, the TeePublic. Yeah. So
TeePublic.com/Conspirinormal store. You can get them in any kind of color. You can get hoodies, whatever, with the classic, 2 classic logos, the skull fez and the Bigfoot fez.
Yeah, and our Sasquatch. Yep. So yeah, go to that as well. Please, guys, leave us a review on iTunes, and don't forget about the YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast on YouTube. That is there as well. Okay, that's it. All right, guys, next week, Dr. Future ends the year with us. We're going to be talking about his forthcoming book. So that is going to be happening.
It's really happening.
So join us next time with Dr. Future on Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.